On November 8, 1965, a maid discovered the body of Dorothy Kilgallen, America's most famous female journalist, in a bedroom of her Manhattan townhouse. She was sitting up in bed. A book lay beside her, reading glasses neatly placed on her face. Everything looked as if she had simply fallen asleep while reading. But something was strange. Dorothy never slept in this room. It was a guest bedroom, a room she hadn't used in years. Her own bedroom was on the floor above, the book lying next to the body. Dorothy had never read it before. No one in the household remembered ever seeing this book in the house. And now for the interesting part. Dorothy Kilgallen was the only journalist in the world who had managed to secure a private interview with Jack Ruby, the man who shot Lee Harvey Oswald. She spent 8 minutes alone with him, without witnesses, without recording equipment, without guards. And she claimed that what she learned in that room would blow this case sky high. A few months after this interview, she was dead. Her notes, hundreds of pages of investigation into the Kennedy assassination, vanished without a trace. They were never found. The official version: accidental overdose of barbiturates combined with alcohol. But the deeper you dig into this story, the clearer you'll understand. Someone desperately didn't want Dorothy Kilgallen to tell the world what she knew. And that someone may have worn an FBI badge. But before we examine the circumstances of her death, you need to understand who Dorothy Kilgallen was, because that will explain why the most powerful people in America considered her a threat. By 1965, Dorothy Kilgallen wasn't just a journalist. She was an institution. Her column, The Voice of Broadway, was published in more than 200 newspapers across America. Every morning, millions of Americans opened their papers to see what Dorothy had written. She knew Hollywood's secrets, Washington's dirty laundry, and the mysteries hidden in New York's skyscrapers. But most importantly, she was the face of television. For 17 years, from 48 to 65, she was a regular panelist on What's My Line? On CBS. Every Sunday evening, 20 million Americans saw her on screen. 20 million. That was more than the audience for some presidential addresses. Dorothy began her career at 18 when she got a job at her father's newspaper. By 23, she had already completed a race around the world against 2 other journalists, and nearly won. She covered the most sensational trials of the century. The trial of Bruno Hauptmann, the kidnapper of the Lindbergh baby, the Nuremberg trials of Nazi war criminals, the case of Dr. Sam Shepard, the very one that would later inspire the creators of The Fugitive. Dorothy wasn't an ordinary society columnist. She was an investigator. She dug where others were afraid to even approach. And she had sources. Bartenders, maids, secretaries, police officers, politicians, they all trusted Dorothy. She had spent years building a network of informants that any intelligence agency would envy. People told her things they would never tell anyone else. That's why one man watched her particularly closely. His name was John Edgar Hoover. And this is where the story gets truly dark. Because Hoover didn't just observe Dorothy. He collected information about her. The only question is, why? To understand what kind of enemy Dorothy was facing, you need to understand who Edgar Hoover was. By the 60s, he had run the FBI for nearly 40 years. 40 years. He had outlasted 8 presidents. Each of them wanted to fire him. None of them dared. Why? Because Hoover knew everything. His agents collected compromising material on politicians, businessmen, public figures, journalists. Thousands of dossiers were kept in his personal office. Secret folders marked confidential, director's eyes only. These folders were his insurance policy, his weapon, his power. Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King? Hoover recorded his phone conversations and intimate encounters. President Kennedy? The FBI knew about his affairs with women. Eleanor Roosevelt? Her file ran to hundreds of pages. And yes, Hoover had a file on Dorothy Kilgallen. After her death, researchers discovered FBI documents that called her the most dangerous woman in America with regard to spreading rumors. Hoover hated her. She was beyond his control. She asked uncomfortable questions. And worst of all, she had her own sources inside his agency. Dorothy repeatedly published information that the FBI wanted to keep hidden. She revealed details of investigations before the Bureau was ready. She made Hoover look foolish. He tolerated it for years, grinding his teeth, but he tolerated it, and then the shots rang out in Dallas. November 22nd, 1963, the day that changed everything, both for America and for Dorothy Kilgallen personally, because that's when she began digging a grave, perhaps her own. When John Kennedy was killed, Dorothy Kilgallen didn't react like other journalists. She didn't rush to write obituaries and didn't repeat official versions. She started asking questions, uncomfortable questions. Why was the motorcade route changed at the last minute? Why didn't the Secret Service provide adequate protection? Why was Lee Harvey Oswald shot in front of police officers and cameras 2 days after his arrest? And the main question, who was Jack Ruby, and why did he kill the only person who could tell the truth? By early '64, Dorothy was obsessed with this case. She flew to Dallas. She met with police officers, witnesses, lawyers. She studied every detail, every inconsistency, every contradiction, and she found them by the dozens. The Warren Commission, the official body investigating the assassination, concluded that Oswald acted alone. 1 shooter, 3 shots, no conspiracy. Dorothy didn't believe it for a second. In her column, she wrote things no one else dared to write. She called the Commission's report the grossest falsification. She claimed the evidence was fabricated. She demanded an independent investigation. But Hoover controlled all the information. The FBI conducted the official investigation. The FBI provided evidence to the Warren Commission. The FBI decided what the public would see and what would remain classified forever. Dorothy understood this, and she decided to bypass the FBI, to get information directly from the only source who could still talk, from Jack Ruby's cell. What happened next remains one of the greatest mysteries in the history of American journalism. 8 minutes alone with Oswald's killer. 8 minutes that could have changed history. 8 minutes whose contents Dorothy took to her grave, or did she? The trial of Jack Ruby began in March 1964. Dorothy was there from day one. She sat in the courtroom, making notes in her neat handwriting, observing every detail. But it wasn't enough for her. She wanted to speak with Ruby personally, without protocols, without cameras, without lawyers, and somehow how is still unknown. She achieved it. During a recess in the proceedings, Dorothy obtained permission to speak with Ruby in a room behind the courtroom. 8 minutes. Alone, it was an unprecedented case. No other journalist received such access, neither before nor after. What happened in that room? Dorothy never revealed the details, but she began telling her friends strange things. "This case will never be closed," she told one of them. "I'm going to blow this case sky high," she told another, "and the most mysterious. They'll kill me, but it will be worth it." Who were they? Dorothy didn't elaborate. After the interview with Ruby, she gained access to another exclusive material, the complete transcript of Ruby's testimony before the Warren Commission. This document was classified. No one outside the commission was supposed to see it. Dorothy published it in her column. Hoover was furious. An investigation into the leak began. The FBI tried to find out who had given the document to the journalist. Agents interrogated commission members, lawyers, secretaries. They never found the source. Dorothy protected her informants to the end. She never named a single name, despite the pressure, but she kept digging. By the end of '64, she was telling friends she was working on a book that would tell the whole truth about the Kennedy assassination, a book based on documents she had been collecting for 2 years. The manuscript was almost finished, she said. Just a few more facts to verify. This manuscript, about 300 pages of typed text, was in her house on the night of her death. By morning, it was gone. No one ever saw it. No one knows what was in it. And perhaps someone made sure we would never find out. Autumn 1965. Dorothy was acting strangely. Her friends noticed. She had become paranoid. She looked over her shoulder on the street, checked if she was being followed, changed her routes, scheduled meetings in unexpected places. She told one friend that she was being watched, another that her phone was tapped, a third that she had been threatened. Threatened? By whom? Dorothy didn't name names, but she kept working, every day, every night. Her obsession with the Kennedy case had become an all-consuming passion. In early November, she met with an unknown informant. This meeting is known only from the diary of a friend who happened to mention it in her notes. Dorothy looked excited after this meeting, happy, almost euphoric. "I got what I needed," she said. "Now I have everything." That was 3 days before her death. On November 7th, Sunday evening, Dorothy appeared on What's My Line. As usual, she looked normal. She joked, laughed, guessed the occupations of guests. But those who knew her well noticed something. Beneath the layer of makeup, exhaustion. In her eyes, tension. In her voice, a barely perceptible tremor. After the broadcast, Dorothy went to a party. She was seen there around midnight. She had a few cocktails, chatted with friends, went home. No one saw her alive again. On the morning of November 8th, the maid opened the door to the guest bedroom. What she saw there is officially considered an accident. But when you learn the details, you'll understand why millions of people still don't believe this version. Let's examine the facts. Fact 1. Location of the body. Dorothy was found in the guest bedroom, a room she never used. Her own bedroom, which she shared with her husband, was on the floor above. Why would a woman in her own home go to sleep in a guest room? Dorothy's husband, Richard Colmer, claimed they slept separately because of his snoring. But neighbors and friends had never heard about this before. Fact 2. Appearance. Dorothy was found fully dressed and wearing makeup. She was wearing evening clothes, the same ones she had worn to the party. Makeup still in place. Dorothy never went to bed without removing her makeup. Never. Everyone who knew her knew this. She was obsessed with skincare. Fact 3. The book. Next to the body lay a book that, according to household members, Dorothy had never read before. Moreover, several friends later stated they had never seen this book in her home. Where did it come from? Fact 4. The glasses. Dorothy wore reading glasses. They were on her face when the body was found, but they were the wrong glasses, not the ones she usually used. Where were her real glasses? They were never found. Fact 5. The autopsy. The official cause of death, a combination of barbiturates and alcohol, accidental overdose. But the barbiturate content in her blood was 3 times the lethal dose. 3 times. That's not an accidental overdose. That's either suicide or murder. Dorothy was not suicidal. Everyone who knew her confirmed this. She was at the peak of her career. She was working on the biggest story of her life. Fact 6. Lack of investigation. The New York police closed the case within hours, without a serious investigation, without interviewing witnesses, without forensic examination. Why such haste? And finally, the most important fact, the one that turns everything upside down. Dorothy's documents, her notes, her manuscript, her evidence disappeared. Every last one, as if they had never existed. Dorothy Kilgallen was obsessed with documentation. She kept copies of everything. Every interview, every note, every letter. Her office was packed with folders and notebooks. By the time of her death, she had been working on the Kennedy case for almost 2 years. 2 years of research, hundreds of interviews, thousands of pages of notes, an almost completed book manuscript. All of it disappeared. Her friends and colleagues remembered these materials. They had seen the folders. They had heard Dorothy discuss their contents. They knew she kept copies in several places in case something happened. After her death, nothing was found. Not a single page of investigation. Not a single interview. Not a single note about Ruby, Oswald, or the conspiracy. How is that possible? Dorothy's husband, Richard Calmer, spent several hours alone in the house before calling the police. Several hours. What was he doing all that time? Calmer later remarried and died in 1971. He never told what happened that night. He took his secrets to the grave, but there's another line of investigation. A few weeks before her death, Dorothy gave a copy of her manuscript to a close friend, a manicurist named Marjorie Farnsworth. Marjorie confirmed this. She saw the folder. She held it in her hands. 2 days after Dorothy's death, Marjorie was also found dead. Official cause? Traumatic brain injury from a fall in the bathroom. The folder with the documents disappeared. Coincidence? Perhaps. But when you add this to the other facts, a picture begins to emerge. Someone desperately wanted these documents never to see the light of day. Someone powerful enough to act quickly and with impunity. Someone with the resources to conduct such an operation. The FBI, the Mafia, the CIA, or someone else. We'll never know for sure. But the story gets even stranger when you look at what happened after Dorothy's death, because she wasn't the only one who died investigating the Kennedy assassination. After Kennedy's assassination, more than 50 people somehow connected to the case, died under mysterious circumstances. The statistical probability of such a coincidence is 1 in a trillion. Jack Ruby, the very man Dorothy spoke with, died of cancer in prison a few months after her death. A few days before his death, he claimed he had been poisoned. David Ferry, the alleged liaison between Oswald and the conspirators, was found dead in his apartment in '67, just days before he was scheduled to testify to prosecutor Jim Garrison. Mary Pinchot Meyer, a close friend of Kennedy and wife of a high-ranking CIA officer, was shot during a walk in '64. The killer was never found. The list goes on. Dorothy Kilgallen fits perfectly into this list, a journalist who asked too many questions, who got too close to the truth, who threatened to expose a conspiracy involving the most powerful people in the country. Hoover had been watching her for years. He had motive. He had resources. He had opportunity. But there's no evidence. As with all these cases, there's no evidence. And that is perhaps the most terrifying thing about this whole story. Not that Dorothy may have been murdered, but that we will never know the truth, because those who could have told it are either dead or silent. Nearly 60 years have passed since the death of Dorothy Kilgallen. The official version still hasn't changed, accidental overdose, but the questions remain. Why was she found in a room where she never slept? Why was she fully dressed and wearing makeup? Why was there a book beside her that she had never read? Why did all her documents disappear? Why was the investigation closed so quickly? And the main question, what did Jack Ruby tell her during those 8 minutes alone? Some researchers believe that Ruby gave her names, the names of those behind the Kennedy assassination, names she was about to publish in her book. Others think she obtained documentary evidence of FBI or CIA involvement in covering up the truth. Still others believe she learned about connections between the mafia, intelligence agencies, and politicians, connections so dangerous that their exposure alone could bring down the entire system. We don't know, but we do know one thing. Dorothy Kilgallen was prepared to give her life for this story. "They'll kill me," she told her friends, "but it will be worth it." If she was indeed murdered, and many believe exactly that, then she paid the price she herself had named. She was a journalist to the very end. She asked questions no one else dared to ask. And perhaps, just perhaps, she found the answers. Answers that someone desperately didn't want you to hear. Edgar Hoover died in 1972, still serving as FBI director. His secret filing system, thousands of folders with compromising material on the most influential people in America, disappeared the night of his death. His personal secretary, Helen Gandy, spent several hours in his office destroying documents. What was in those folders? We'll never know. But maybe, just maybe, among them was a folder with Dorothy Kilgallen's name on the cover. A folder that would have told us what happened that November night in 1965. A folder that would finally explain why America's most famous journalist died in a room where she never slept, with a book she never read, dressed in evening clothes with full makeup. That folder could have told us the truth. But the truth, like Dorothy Kilgallen, was buried alive. And perhaps that is the biggest secret of all. Some mysteries are never meant to come to light. Or are they? That's for you to decide. If this story intrigued you, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. There are many more mysteries waiting to be investigated. See you in the next video.